good? All right. Well, hey, everybody, and welcome. I'm Dave Isaacs here at Mission Control for JamPlay.com. I'm glad to have all of y'all joining us. And this course is called Phrase Like a Pro. So it's about lead guitar playing, it's about improvisation. But I want to be clear about something. This is designed for everyone that's ever had any interest in playing lead guitar. And when I say lead guitar, I feel like I have to qualify that. Because in my private teaching, I have people come in and say things like, well, I don't really need to learn how to play guitar solos, or don't need to learn how to do anything fancy. And okay, that's fine. But at the same time, let's just say, and those of you who are here, maybe I don't need to be talking to you about this, but then again, I think it's worth saying that all I'm really talking about is the ability to play melody and to be able to make a statement on the guitar besides just strumming some chords, okay? And the thing is, even if you are mostly a rhythm player and you just want to be able to start to incorporate some melody aspects into what you do, then the concepts that we're looking at in this course are actually going to be very useful to you in that way. Because this is also about overall musicianship. I need to be clear about something so you understand my philosophy about how this stuff works. Yes, it's all about the guitar. Yes, we love the guitar. Yes, it's cool. And I am just as happy getting up there and spitting out 20-minute guitar solos as anybody else is, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, I think no matter how modest or huge your goals might be, that it's just as important that you're focused in on becoming a musician and not just a person that plays the guitar. And people will say to me, well, I'm not really a musician. I play for fun. I'm not talking about whether you do it professionally. I'm not talking about whether you get paid for it. I'm not talking about whether you play in a band or not, or write songs or not, or whatever it is. If you play music, you're learning to be a musician. It's going to serve you to be as musical as you can. But that doesn't have to be intimidating either. There's a few fundamental things that all good musicians understand, even if it's just on an intuitive level. There's a lot of stuff that, we all know people that just seem to have this wonderful natural gift. I won't say seem, people that have a wonderful natural gift. They pick up an instrument and they're able to just find their way on it. And it can be very frustrating to watch those people when you're not one of them, if you feel like you're struggling. But the thing to understand is that those people have an intuitive sense of a few concrete things that you can learn very naturally. And the other thing that I would suggest is that if you play the guitar now, if you've even ever had an interest in playing the guitar, you've listened to music all your life. You know what music sounds like. You know what a guitar does in the role of whatever type of song that you're listening to. Even if you couldn't articulate it, you've heard it enough that it's there in the back of your head. So the exercises and things that we're going to be doing in this course are meant to connect you to some of those basic things that the people who seem to do it effortlessly just understand intuitively. Those of you who might find some of these explanations overly simple, don't scoff. Take a moment to go with me with this, because sometimes even just tuning in and sort of reconnecting with these basics can be really, really helpful. Okay? Now, as I'm proceeding, if you have questions, please make a note of that, and we're going to open things up to questions at the end of this session and every one of the sessions of this 9-session course. That was a lot of the use of the word session in one sentence. So, with all of that said, let's go ahead with lesson 1. Now, people talk about the distinction between playing lead guitar and rhythm guitar. And yes, obviously that's two different roles. One is primarily rhythmic and harmonic, meaning chordal. One is primarily melodic. But if you don't have a good sense of rhythm, if you don't understand what groove and pocket are, then it's going to be pretty much impossible for you to play good lead guitar. Because good lead guitar, good melody of any kind, has to be rhythmic. And I know people that say, well, my big problem is I have terrible time. And maybe you do and maybe you don't, but I'd be willing to bet that if you think you do, you may not have ever spent that much time on it. Do you practice with a metronome? Do you even sit down and just see if you can keep time? Someone will sit across from me in a lesson and say, I have terrible time. And I'll say, okay, can you tap your foot? And they'll tap their foot. So can you tap on your knee? And I have yet to see somebody that when I ask them to do this, can't basically keep time. Remember, we're rhythmic creatures. We walk in rhythm, we talk in rhythm, our hearts beat in rhythm, we breathe in rhythm. A steady pulse is something that's very natural to us. So I want you to remember that word, because rhythm works on multiple levels, and the foundation level is the pulse. It's the steady beat that underlies everything. It can be faster, can be slower. For the most part, when you're playing one song, it's consistent from beginning to end, although it doesn't have to be. And no matter how complex the part you're playing might be, that pulse underlies everything and it organizes the musical ideas in time. The next layer of rhythm is groupings of pulses into measures or meter. So if we say a song is in 4, it means that those steady pulses are getting grouped into 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that's doing more than just counting. That's doing more than just putting a ruler, physically, metaphorically speaking, against time. If you think about it, once you've established a count of 4, a song in 4 in a meter of 4/4, there's now a hierarchy of beats. This brings us to the next stage. You've got the pulse, the steady beat. You've got meter, which is the groupings of pulses into 4s or 3s or 2s or whatever it is. Then comes, naturally, really, with this grouping of beats, is the hierarchy in the sense that we have strong and weak beats. And that first count, the beginning of the cycle, is what we call the downbeat, and that is almost always going to feel naturally stronger than the rest. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Keep in mind that, as I said, we're rhythmic creatures and we like patterns. Our minds organize the world into patterns. So as soon as you organize beats into 4 counts, you have this hierarchy. You come back around to that downbeat at the beginning, okay? And that's the beginning of the cycle. That's what makes it have a natural emphasis. Now, so the first thing you need to be able to do is A, keep a steady beat, and we've established that most people, when you move away from the guitar, have no problem keeping time. It's when you add this into the mix. And so one of the things you need to do, and here's where, if you're a more advanced player, if you're more comfortable with some of these more advanced things, bear with me a little bit. Even if you think you don't need this exercise, I think it has value for you. I'm not talking about working with a track or anything like that yet. I'm talking about your own internal sense of rhythm. So you start off by tapping your foot. If tapping your foot isn't natural, maybe you rock your upper body. Maybe you just nod your head. We're not worried about we're not thinking about coordinating something aside from just being able to keep track of a pulse and to be able to play something that fits with it. So even something as simple as just playing an open string, open A string, and counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. As simple as that is, that's a musical statement. And I'll bet if you start just thinking about it, you can envision a groove, a beat under that. 2, 3. Maybe it's D, 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 da, D, 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 da, D, 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 da, D, 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 da. And mentioning that hierarchy, right? Notice that I started to tap out as I'm keeping time, not just 1, 2, 3, 4, but counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. There's 2 different things that I'm doing. One, I'm subdividing each one of those beats into 2 equal pairs. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. If you read music, or even if you understand anything fundamental about music notation, which I'm going to suggest is helpful, because when you look at the supplemental materials, stuff on the screen or things that you might print out on paper, the tabs are there, but the notation is there as well. And when we're talking about rhythm, One of the shortcomings of tab is that it's hard to show rhythm. You can put stems on notes, on numbers, you can put circles around them and things like that. But just having a basic understanding of rhythm notation is really helpful. So a whole note is that count of 4. That's just the oval. 2, 3, 4. A half note is hollow note with a tail. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's half that count of 4, right? A quarter note, which is a quarter of the count of 4, 1 for each beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's your colored in note with a tail. And then when we divide those in half, we get 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and those are 8 notes. So back to this idea of the hierarchy. We've got the pulse at the fundamental level. We've got the meter established by grouping those pulses into 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we start adding these subdivisions. Now check this out. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now you might be going, this is a guitar class, this is about lead guitar, what are you doing just tapping on your knee? Bear with me here. This is important stuff for you to feel. This is developing your gut sense of rhythm and groove, which, as I said, is essential. If you don't have it, you're not going to be any good to anybody as a lead guitar player. So, think about this. Layers. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's your slowest moving layer. Then on top of that, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'm not playing it, but I'm counting it and feeling it. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and... Just knowing that those subdivisions are there lets me start to play with this, and I'm going to show you in a moment how that works. One last thing you should be aware of is this idea of downbeat and backbeat. We're going to get more deeply into this as well. But essentially, it's just the alternation when you have those steady counts between one sound and another. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Even playing on an open string, look what happens here. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. That emphasis on every other beat now starts to create a back and forth. You're hearing a relationship between two different things played with two different basic sounds and at two different dynamics. One is louder than the other. All of those things, the idea of staying with the pulse, the idea of working with the subdivisions of the pulse, and the idea of playing with dynamics, are really going to be essential to all of this, okay? This is part of the big musicianship skills that underlie everything that you do in playing guitar. So, let's talk about the guitar. Now, right now, I'm using one note. I'm hanging out on the 4th string, 7th fret. This note is an A. It's the octave of your open A. It's going to be the foundation of the scales we're going to use for the next 2 lessons. So get yourself started here. And if you're following along at home and you want to do different notes, that's fine. But if you want to go with me, this is the note that I'm playing. And all we're going to think about right now is rhythm. So if we can go to our exercises here, we're going to start dealing with some of these different groupings. At the top, the very first example, we're on the beat. Now, no track yet. All you're doing is keeping time. Tap your foot, rock your upper body, or nod your head, and we're just going to do this. It's the first example only. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and stop. 2, 3, and again, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1. Now, I want you to think about the subdivisions in your head as you do that, like this. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and... You still play the quarter note, but you're feeling the subdivision. And 2, and 3, and 4, and... Now, going to the next example, you see there are 2 notes. In this next measure, by the way, if you're not familiar with that, the measures are simply the areas of the music that are divided up by the vertical bar lines. Second one is half notes, 2 counts each. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Easy enough. Now try keeping track of the eighth notes in your head. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Now, let's add one other aspect to that. I want you to count the 2 and 4 counts. In other words, the strong beats that are in between the notes you played. Count them out loud, but don't play them, like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And what you might notice is as soon as we add that element, now that's an element of dynamics because we're putting an accent on beats that even though we're not playing them, you're still feeling. That's the dynamic aspect, the stronger accent, feeling it physically as a stronger beat. That's really important, and you might notice as you're doing this that it starts to feel more like music, even though all I'm doing is playing half notes. Because now we're fitting this into a rhythmic framework. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. Now we're going to develop this. If you're looking at the exercise, you'll see that there's a variety of different patterns coming up here. I'm going to work my way through all of these and then show you how you're going to use them with the track. The next one is a combination of longer and shorter notes. A half note for 2 counts, 2 quarter notes, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. This illustrates something important. When you're improvising, when you're deciding what rhythm to play, and of course these decisions happen quickly. The whole idea is to develop a sense of spontaneity and flow. These exercises will start to give you some bits and pieces to use in the course of doing that. But there's a really fundamental idea here when it comes to phrasing. At any given moment, you're going to choose to play or not play. You're going to choose to let a note ring out, or you're going to play another note, or you're going to choose to stop the sound completely. So in this case, I want you to notice that with the combination of the longer note and the shorter notes, that second beat is where we don't play. And I want you to feel that as a beat that is articulated in the sense that you feel it in your gut and you count it, but you don't play it. You perceive it as a space. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, that starts to do something musical because we've taken that pulse and added this musical rhythmic framework around it. You should start to feel the difference. I'm going to play that whole first line with the count. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Here it is again. Notice that I'm emphasizing that backbeat. In fact, I'm going to put in a little rhythmic hit just in between here. Now, if you're comfortable enough that you can reach this 7th fret note and make a little bar here on the 5th fret, 1st string, 2nd string, 3rd string, I'm going to fill in those spaces with a little chop on that chord. Check it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to play it again without counting, and I want you to notice that now what's happened is I've set up a conversation between the single note and the chord, what you might think of as foreground and background. Here's the other big musical skill you want to develop. You want to be able to be aware of 2 things at once. It could be as simple as the thing you're playing against the pulse, or it could be the thing you're playing against another rhythmic pattern that's happening around you. Listen to this same thing and think of it as being a conversation in two parts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Immediately, more musical, even that very simple idea. So if somebody else were playing that chord part, you would have a similar experience of the two parts interacting. And the idea is for you to feel those other beats that you're not playing as strongly as the ones that you do. This is really important because it's all about developing this internal sense. And this is why I'm talking more than I'm playing right now, because I want you thinking about that. I want you thinking about your body and your sense of timing more than I want you thinking about your guitar right at this moment. Okay? But of course, the idea is to integrate the guitar into this bigger picture. I'm going on to the second line, and we're going to work now with subdivisions. So remember, we've already established 1, 2, 3, 4. Quarter notes get divided into eighth notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, I'm going to play through this line, and I do want you to look at it as 4 separate examples, so I'm going to play each one twice. Just be aware of, number 1, the steady pulse, 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 2, the subdivisions, fitting 2 notes into each pulse, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And number 3, the idea of play or don't play, hit a note or leave space. This is the second line. Notice the subdivisions, and the rests are where I'm leaving space in between. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and let's do that again. 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Play, then don't play. Here's the next one. 1, 2 and stop. 1, 2 and stop. 1, 2 and stop. Here's the next one. 1 and 2 and 3 and stop. 1 and 2 and 3 and stop. Simple enough, right? Just working with different combinations of those pairs of eighth notes fitting with the quarter note pulses. And the last one on that line, 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and. Now, hopefully you've absorbed that to the point where you can duplicate those rhythms. I want to take this a step further and go to the track now, but before we do that, we need to establish something else about the timing. So I want you to listen to this for a moment. This is just the background. As long as, okay, good. Listen for the pulse, and I want you to notice a detail about this pulse, about this rhythm that we haven't talked about yet. The rhythm is a slow shuffle. A shuffle is when instead of dividing that beat into even pairs, they're uneven pairs. But it's a very familiar sound, and as soon as you hear it, you'll recognize it. There's your pulse. A 1, a 2, a 3, a 4. Hear that guitar chop on the backbeat? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Now, I'm going to play these patterns against that background. I'm on the second line. 3, 4, 1, and. Here it is again. Ba-da, ba-da, ba-ba-da, ba-da, be-da, ba-da. Pretty straightforward, right? Now, what you're going to practice when all this is done is you're going to take some of these examples, and instead of playing it through just in order like I just did, you might mix them up. You might even do it with the first line. Keep it simple. We're going to get more involved as you go, as you can see looking at the rest of the exercise. But one other thing I want you to keep in mind, Keep the pulse, stay on the one note, stay aware of how the notes you're playing fit against that background. Notice the pulse, notice the subdivisions you're playing to, notice the backbeat, the hierarchy of 1 against 2, 3 against 4. Okay? And picking-wise, here's a real simple approach to something like this. If I'm playing quarter notes on the beat, I'm playing downstrokes. If I'm playing eighth notes, I'm playing alternate down and upstrokes. So you notice I'm in the shuffle rhythm now because the downbeat is longer than the upbeat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. If you follow a basic general rule of picking, that you pick down on a downbeat and up on an upbeat, then these picking patterns become very easy to work out because the rhythm itself will tell you what to play. Going back to our exercises here, check this out now. I'm going to go to the third line, and this is more combinations of steady pulses and the eighth notes that divide things up. Okay, so this would be marked as measure 9. It's the third line, and I'm going to do it with the track again. So let me set this back to the beginning. I'm going to play each example twice, so I'm not going to go straight through the full line just yet. 2, 3, 4. Listen to how even that makes a statement. Here's the next one. 1, 2, 3, and. Now just for fun, I'm going to go back and play the first one again. Check it out. First one. Pause. Play it again. Now I'll play the next one. And again. Back to the first. Pretty cool, right? I mean, that in itself, that was a musical statement. And even on that one note, it sounded like something. Now, if I had other notes going on there, that could have been a nice little melodic line. We're going to explore this further, but you see the basic idea of what we're doing here. Each one of these rhythmic patterns is like a little cell, a little piece that you can absorb. And what you're going to do is, it's like, ever play with Legos as a kid? You have all these little pieces and you put them together in different ways and create things. That's what we're doing here. Let's go ahead continuing on with these exercises. We're in the middle of that third line. Here's the track. I'm going to the third example. One and 2, 3 and 4. Here it is again. 1 and 2, 3 and 4. Now think about this. You want to pay attention to on the beat or off the beat. We've been focusing on the quarter note, play or don't play, 1, 2, 3, 4. But when we start dealing with these subdivisions, try muting your strings and just strumming along. Up, down, up, down, up, down. Well, you can choose not to play on the downstroke. So at measure 12, the last example of that line, we get this. 1 and 2, and not playing on beat 2. Notice how the chop, that guitar chop on the backing track, interacts with the space we leave on beat 2. Chop, chop. Now I'll start mixing it up. See, that was just mixing the first and fourth examples of that line, and again, it starts to sound musical. I need to go ahead and get through the rest of these, and what I'm going to do now, since we're going to get to the beginning of our Q&A time in just a couple of minutes, is I want to push this forward so you're clear on what you're going to be practicing going ahead, although I think you see where this is going. The next line is doing a lot more with the offbeats. The offbeats are the ands, the in-between. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So this is marked as measure 13 in your exercise, and I'm going to go through these one at a time, playing each one twice. 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. I'm doing this with up picks. I don't have to, but it gives a nice sense of lift. Here's the next one. 1 and 2 and then don't play. The next one combines upbeats and downbeats. 1 and 2 and 3 and. That's a pretty cool little figure. 1 and 2. And the last one, bop, bop. That was downstrokes. Down, down, but also down, up. Let me continue on. Measure 17. 1, 2, and 3, 4. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3. That's a good one to know. Next, da, ba, da. This is 18. 19. But continuing. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and. This one's 2 measures long. 1 and 2 and. So that one's a little trickier. Put that on there as a bit more of a challenge. But now I want to show you what I want you to do. I'm going to pick different examples out of those, basically, well, depending on how you group things, 19 or 20 examples, depending on how you look at it. And I'm just going to let the track go. I'm going to start off on one note and just playing the rhythmic figures, but I'm going to pull one from here, one from there, one from there, and try to organize things in a musical, balanced way, which is what we're going to get into on the next thing. But after I do a little bit of that, repeating the one note, I'm going to start changing the notes just so you can hear an example of how this gets applied when you bring a scale into it. We're not there yet as far as the course, but I do want you to hear it. Okay? So here we go. Mixing it up. I can make longer musical ideas by stringing 2 or even 3 of these ideas together. Now, you see how it starts to become musical. Now, one last idea on this. If you're not really comfortable with putting all of this together just yet, then you should really just stick with choosing a couple of examples, maybe just the first line, maybe just the second line, and work through each little rhythm, counting if you need to go back and watch the archive of this to hear those patterns again, then do. If you find that it helps you to use speech, to use your voice to articulate those rhythms so you really hear them, then do. So you could just ba da dee da da dum, ba dum bum. You could do it with the track. Ba dee ba bum, ba bum bum, ba bum, ba bum, ba bum bum. In fact, I'm going to suggest that you try that with the track, because I'm going to suggest to you, and this is based on things that I've observed teaching privately for 30 some years at this point. Sometimes the guitar presents an obstacle to your ability to absorb something as a musician because you're focused on your hands and not your ears and your body. So using your voice is a great way to absorb some of these things. You're using the physicality of your body to feel the rhythm, which makes it a whole lot easier to then be musical. So just to kind of wrap up this little idea, I'm going to work with some of these ideas without a backing track at all, and you're still going to hear music. Let's try a little faster. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry about that. 2, 3, 4. Now, if you can plug in pieces of the scale like I just did, then by all means do. That's wonderful. The whole idea here is that this exercise is applicable whether your skills are very, very basic or whether they're more advanced. If you're already starting to move around the neck and do other stuff, I'm just going to suggest something to you, that for the purposes of the exercise, for you to get the most out of this, particularly if you're going to practice for a couple of hours and come back to the next one, which I really hope you are, that you will find that it's easier to develop a particular skill when you zero in on that one thing to the exclusion of other things that you could be thinking about. So, for example, thinking just about rhythm on one note takes away having to worry about which scale to use or which note of the scale to use. Limiting yourself to one scale in a particular area of the neck takes away your having to worry about where on the neck you're going to be. Not worrying about things like slides and bends and so forth lets you stay focused on the rhythm, which is the task at hand, the thing that we're really trying to work with, not so much about the physicality of playing the guitar. This is about relating the guitar notes to your internal sense of rhythm. And as I said, there is not a single good lead guitar player out there who doesn't have great rhythm. And I would challenge you to find anybody. Go back and listen to Eddie Van Halen and listen to those rhythm riffs and those Van Halen tunes. They're killer. His pocket is fantastic. Listen to Hendrix. His pocket is fantastic. There is not any great lead player that doesn't have good timing and can't also play good rhythm. So remember that. Okay? So I think it's about time to open things up for questions, which I do hope that you have. So what do you say, Chris? Do we have questions?
We just got our first question in.
Beautiful.
So
Good timing.
I'm going to get it into the box here in just a second.
For those of you who don't know, you might imagine we're surrounded by lights and screens and cameras, and this is mission control for JamPlay right here. It's very exciting for me to be here.
All right, this question is from Marcos. Talking about obstacles, is it easier in the long run to use an electric guitar instead of an acoustic one? Are the strings easier on the fingers?
That's a great question, Marcos, and I will say that in a lot of ways, The electric guitar is easier on your fingers because the strings tend to be lighter, the string tension tends to be lighter, and the neck may be a little bit smaller. Now, if you're finding that in general you're not physically comfortable on an instrument, you really might want to try something else. Some people just gravitate to an electric guitar and it feels better to them. Other people gravitate to an acoustic and that feels better. An acoustic, as a rule, will have heavier strings. The string tension will be a little bit higher. And when you start getting into things like bending strings, obviously that becomes more of a question. But without this sounding like a non-answer, you may have to try both and see what feels better. Some people really do have issues when they're developing the calluses with the fingertips hurting until they get to the point where those calluses get thick enough. And that's not going to be any different on acoustic or electric, but the electric should allow you to be a little lighter. And that is something to keep in mind. You don't really want to be digging in and gripping to hold the strings down. And if you're having to do that, your guitar needs adjusting anyway, most likely. But I'd say short answer is electric is probably easier unless you find that it's challenging for you to fit your fingers onto the strings. But also keep in mind, one guitar is different from another. The shapes, the necks are shaped differently, so you have to find something that fits your hand, and that's an important point. Excuse me.
Okay, that's all the questions we have right now. Hopefully that means everybody's tracking with you and understanding everything.
Okay.
I'll just remind everyone, if you do have any kind of question for Dave, go ahead and type it in the chat box, and we'll get it queued up here. Otherwise, I think he's going to expound a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I'd like to comment on is when you start to explore, you have this page in front of you that has all these different rhythmic exercises. And by just looking at it as a set of building blocks, right? Think about your Legos. You're going to pick up that one, you're going to pick up this one, you're going to put them together. If you find that it's challenging for you to do that stuff in real time, then just do it away from the track. The track obviously adds another element to it. But because we're developing this sense of rhythm and this sense of timing, being able to do it where you're just generating the pulse yourself is really important. This is something that I've come to observe, excuse me, working with singers. When a singer learns how to play an instrument for the first time, they tend to find rhythm a little bit challenging. And I know it's the old joke about singers and rhythm, right? It's a cliche. But like lots of cliches, there's an element of truth to it. Because as a vocalist, you're not creating the rhythm, you are singing over the top of the rhythm that's being created by the people making the music, whether it's a live band or a track or a single musician or whatever it is. So you don't have to generate that pulse yourself. And that's not to say that a great singer doesn't have a very good sense of pocket and timing, because absolutely they do. One of the things that made Frank Sinatra one of the great singers of the 20th century was not necessarily that he had the greatest voice, but his phrasing was just fantastic. If you do sing, and you've ever tried to sing those songs the way he sang them, it's not easy. But if you're not accustomed to not just keeping time, but being the engine, making that rhythm yourself, it can be challenging. So this is the exercise we're working on. So you might, as I said, you might just use your voice, or you use the guitar, and just keep that pulse. And even if you start off just going pulse, 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 or counting to fours, 1, 2, 3, 4, or pairs of 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. This might be tedious for some of you, but if it's something that you find is challenging in putting the pieces together, this kind of very deliberate, very focused work is extremely powerful. And you'll find that these exercises are easy to do in terms of they don't require a lot of technical ability, it just takes some concentration. And I have yet to run across anybody in 30 years of teaching that hasn't been able to apply this stuff when they put their minds to it. A lot of it has to do with what you're paying attention to. Now, when it comes to how to choose each one, let's say your timing's a little sloppy and you're not exactly in the pocket. That's really okay, because as long as you're thinking about the rhythm, you've got room to develop and get better. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to play some of these things wrong on purpose. Oops. Hold on. We're coming back. Here we go. Now that's just off time, right? But or maybe I start in the middle. Let's say that 4-note pattern that was written as this becomes start on beat 2, or even beat 4. 2, 3, 4. That can be an interesting thing to do. Just take one example, start it in different places. Or starting on the second beat. 1, 2, or the third. 1, 2, or the fourth. 2, 3, 4. So I'm just going to play us out with some of these ideas here. You see how when I started to add more notes to it, it's still not complicated. You can still hear the groupings of beats. You can still feel the pulse. You can still hear that hierarchy of strong and weak beats. And you get the idea of phrasing being about simple rhythmic statements repeated in time. And what it always just comes back to is a very simple play or don't play. And you can not play for long periods of time. You know, guitar players, we fall into this trap because we've got the guitar in our hands, so we feel like our hands have to do something all the time. But a saxophone player, for example, is perfectly comfortable standing on stage and not playing until it's time for them to play something. Or you could play something and have a long space. There's no rules to this. It's all about what sounds good and what feels good.
Okay. We finally got some questions in here. So we do only have a few more minutes left in the session.
Fine.
So we'll try to get to a couple of them here.
Okay.
A common one that's coming up is people asking about the pocket.
Yes, I've used that term more than once.
Yes, so we're gonna go with this question. So playing in the pocket is just playing in time, and then someone else asks, "What is the pocket?"
Okay, it is playing in time. It has to do, though, when you hear rhythm section players, bass players and drummers talk about the pocket, there are subtleties to playing in time. It's one thing to just be 1, 2, 3, 4. But when you start working with live musicians, because we're human beings, everyone's sense of time is a little bit different. We're not machines. And you can be in time without being 100% on with the metronome. Now, it's worth learning to practice with a metronome or with a track because you need to be able to follow along. And of course, we're using a track here where the drum part is being generated digitally, and so it doesn't have the little variations that a human drummer might have. But you'll find that some people play a little ahead of the beat. Some people play a little behind. The idea is, yes, it's playing in time, but it's also fitting into what's going on around you. So a simple way to look at it would be, say, the difference between the straight feel that we started with and the shuffle feel of the track. If I don't have that shuffle, I'm not in the pocket. The other thing, though, is it relates to the dynamic idea and the sense of rhythmic hierarchy. That playing in the pocket means that when you hit that downbeat, it feels like a downbeat. When you hit the upbeat, it feels like an upbeat. Not just random occurrences in time, but working with this idea of strong and weak beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. But what it really comes down to most of all is that you're in the pocket when it feels right. And you know when you feel it. It means that your playing is completely integrated into the rhythmic background that you're a part of. And if it's not something you've ever experienced, I guarantee you, you will know when it happens. And starting to look for that and listen for that is the way that you're going to find it. I hope that's a good explanation, but that's the way I perceive it.
Yes, great. That actually answered a few questions that we had. So,
Oh, good.
this next one, let's see here. You were talking about emphasizing the 2 and 4 beats. Is there an exercise to work on emphasizing different beats to sound naturally?
Absolutely. You could take something as simple as just the 4 quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this could be playing or even just counting. Like if I did this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That feels different. What you're doing is you're practicing placing emphasized beats in time. If I do it with just real briefly with the track here, you'll see what I mean. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Emphasizing 2 and 4. Just playing a little harder. Now emphasizing 1 and 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. How about 1 and 4? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. How about 2 and 3? 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Depending on how fluid you are with this stuff, I mean, there's basically 2 kind of mindsets, right? We talk about left brain, right brain, organized, methodical, creative, more free and open. If you are an organized, methodical person, and even if you're not, you're going to find that it's useful when you're doing an exercise to work through the different permutations and just think through all of them and go through them all. But you may find, if you are more of a right brain person, that when you start doing this, that it starts to morph, it starts to change. That's okay. Just keep track of what you're doing. But the short answer to the question is, yes, you develop that sense of emphasized beats by keeping a pulse and then focusing on emphasizing particular beats within that framework set up by the count of 4.
Okay. And along that line a little bit here, this next question is from Jeff. And first, thanks for offering this awesome course. I'd like some advice on how to get into the rhythm headspace and being able to listen while playing.
That's a great question. And it goes back to a couple of things that I've said before. You know, we get so focused in on our fingers and where our fingers are supposed to go. And of course, we're always trying to learn how to play in time. But, you know, I look, for example, at I've got a student who is 11 years old, has played guitar for a couple of years, and this kid can really pick. You know, I live in Nashville, Tennessee. So this kid has grown up around bluegrass music. And he's learned a bunch of those picking tunes, and he can play them, except that his timing's all over the place because his last teacher never emphasized it. And it's fine that he got to where he is, but he was just focused in on where to put his fingers. That's fine. We probably all did that at some point. So what I said before about stepping away from some of the specifics of what your fingers are doing and just recognizing that rhythm is a physical thing that happens in your body is a really good place to start. When you're listening to music, don't just listen to the guitars, listen to the drummer. If you're in a band or you're watching a band, listen to the drummer. Listen for the dynamics. Start paying attention to the subtleties and listening for those layers that I was talking about. Essentially, you know, I said earlier about how there are people that just have a natural understanding of these things and the rest of us have to learn it. When you know what to look for, what to listen for, it becomes a whole lot easier to find it, right? So, this idea of being aware of a pulse, you start by listening for that. This idea of listening for the meter, rhythmic groupings, recognizing when there's a sense of emphasis on the 1 count. Say you hear something like this. You feel that emphasis on 1. So now listen for this emphasis. 4 and 1. Maybe you have to count to find it, but that's okay. I guess the short answer is you start listening and you start asking questions. What am I hearing? Where's the pulse? Where's the meter? And how is the hierarchy working? What do I feel most strongly? In a lot of songs, what you probably feel most strongly is the backbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, especially if you're a strummer. That backbeat is the thing that drives an awful lot of music. It's a reason why the snare drum is often mixed the loudest thing in a track, because he's got to cut through and move things forward. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I hope that answers the question, but really, sometimes it really is that simple. Just start paying attention to it. As a player, what you may need to do is just play less and listen more. You may have heard that before, but it's good advice.
Okay, and we have time for maybe one more here. This one is from Jenna T. And the question is feeling the pulse enough, or do you have to keep count so you always know what beat you're on?
That's a very, very good question. Ultimately, feeling the pulse is the thing that you want to do intuitively. But it's useful for the learning process, especially when we're breaking things down into these little licks, these little patterns. It's good for you to know the difference between the emphasis on a 2 and the emphasis on a 4. So what I would suggest is that you do start off by counting and notice whether you can feel when you start thinking about that sense of rhythmic hierarchy. For example, emphasizing a backbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once you've counted along with that, the next time a song comes on where there's a strong backbeat, I'll bet you'll notice it. I'll bet you actually recognize what that sounds like. So the point is, the specific patterns can be articulated, can be identified if you count with them, because then you can say, oh, this pattern has an accent on the 1 and the and of 2. But you also start to recognize it when you hear it, and then you're not thinking about counting anymore. Then you're just hearing a rhythm. Great example. It's a Bo Diddley beat, or it's a Latin clave. That's a familiar rhythm. You've heard that many times. Now, sometimes teaching that, I have to go through 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, 3. But the same person can often, if I just say, talk this back to me, bop, 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 they can do it, right? So the answer is really both. Count to recognize the pattern that you're hearing, and then start listening for those patterns in music, and I think you will find that those things start to come together. I do hope that answers the question, but it's a great exercise no matter what.
Okay, I think that is all the questions we have time for in this session. I want to remind everyone that the next session is coming up at 3 o'clock Eastern Time, 1 o'clock here where we're at in Mountain Time. But 3 o'clock Eastern Time, and maybe Dave, you could tell us a little bit about what is going to be in the next session.
The next session is getting into the idea of melody, and specifically how melodies can really be broken down into very simple terms. It's just a sequence of notes that's going to either rise or fall, move or not move. It goes back to that idea of play or don't play. So we've just been dealing with rhythm on its own. If we add this aspect of rise and fall, the idea of a musical line, and you're going to hear me use the word gesture. I prefer that to lick because licks can be a series of gestures. But essentially, it's a way to distill down everything that you could possibly play to the very, very tiny ideas that articulate what's actually going on there. And you'll see that it's very, very powerful. And it's essentially exactly the thing that I was just illustrating in playing some different licks using the rhythms that were in the exercise. So that's where we're headed. So please do come back because this will be a great way to build on what we just did.
Okay, we will see everyone at the next session, 3 o'clock Eastern Time.
See you then, y'all.